think you have to report.
Okay. All right. Good evening. Tonight's shiur, Lili Nishmat Avi Morido Bermer Nuven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And tonight we will be discussing parshat. What's the name of our parshat? Boy, this is good. My brain is not working tonight. Parshat Shlach, which we will be talking about the mission to Eretz Yisrael that somehow didn't quite work out the way it was planned. So let's begin with firstly getting where I'm going here. Okay, and away we go. So the parsha tonight talks, of course, about the story of the Meraglim. At least that's what we call them, the Meraglim. And yet, if we look in the Torah, the word Meraglim appears 7 times, none of which is in this week's parsha. All 7 times the word Meraglim appears in the Torah are all in Parshat Sefer Bereshit, Parshat Miketz, story of Yosef and his brothers, where he accuses them of being Meraglim. The word Meraglim does appear in the book of Yehoshua, and that's about it. A couple other times where we discuss aspects of Meraglim, but not in this week's parsha and not in Moshe's recapitulation of the events when he talks about them in Sefer Dvarim. They are called Anashim, and we don't have the word Liragel to spy or anything, but we do have the word Viaturu, which we're going to hopefully try to address what that means. We'll see that a couple of times in this week's parsha. And we're going to try to compare and contrast this week's parsha with a very similar story that makes up this week's Haftarah in the book of Yehoshua, where we're told about some Meraglim that Yehoshua sends. So I want to first very briefly go through the first chapter of this week's parsha, what the commands are, and break it up into a couple of different pieces. Part 1 is where it seems that if we look at it on the surface, it seems that Hashem commands Moshe that he is supposed to send people to Eretz Yisrael to look at Eretz Yisrael. And we'll see what Moshe charges them with. We're going to see is section 2. We're going to talk about the actual mission itself, and then part 3 of we're going to talk about the report out of the mission. And then we're going to try to see those same 3 pieces in the Haftarah, the appointment of the spies and the mission, the carrying out of the mission, and the aftermath of the mission, or the reporting back of the mission. So if we look at this week's parsha, we find, firstly, very interesting story. The commentaries all focus on this word, shlach lecha anashim. Why lecha for you? Why should you send people? Why didn't you say shlach anashim? Send men. Why shlach lecha? Why for you? Does Hashem tell Moshe? And the Parshanim really look at this story as we see it in Sefer Dvarim, when Moshe is 40 years later telling the generation that's about to enter Eretz Yisrael about the events of this week's parsha. He prefaces the whole sending of the mission by the story with the phrase "Vayitikru Elai Kulchem," that all of Am Yisrael approached Moshe Rabbeinu and says, "Nishlach anashim lefanenu." We need to send some people ahead of us. We all grew up in Egypt. We've never seen Eretz Yisrael. We don't have a MapQuest. We don't have a triptych. We don't have a Waze. We don't have any of this stuff. We have no idea where we're going, what road are we going to follow. And they want to send some people to give them an idea of what's going to happen, of how it's going to, where they're going. Wow. So we start with that command, and then immediately it says, "Vayishlach otam Moshe." Moshe sent them mimidbar Paran, from Paran al pi Hashem, according to the commandment of Hashem, according to what Hashem told him. And then it tells us, "Kulam anoshim rashei v'nei Yisrael hema." All of these were men. Now, the word anashim generally refers to men of stature, men of prominence. They weren't just, people they took off the street. These were people who were up there and were people who had prominence. Roshei B'nai Yisrael hema. They are all leaders among B'nai Yisrael. They didn't just take, any people. And then it lists their names. We're going to skip the names now because that's not the relevant part of the shiur. And then again, after it finishes all the names, it repeats it. Eilish Shemot Anashim, these are the names of the men Asher Shalach Moshe Laturat Haaretz, that Moshe sent to, again, Latur, to look at the land. And Moshe changes the name of Hoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. There's a whole discussion among the Parshanim is when did Moshe change Hoshea bin Nun's name to Yehoshua? It's interesting because there are only twice in the Torah where he's referred to as Hoshea bin Nun. Once is in our parsha. The other happens to be at the end of Parshat Hazino, or at the beginning of Parshat Hazino, or the end of Parshat Vayelech, or Hazino, where Moshe is giving over Shirat Hazino and says, Huva Hoshea bin Nun. He and Hoshea bin Nun teach the people the Shirat Hazino. But in general, Hoshea bin Nun is referred to as Yehoshua throughout the Torah, whether it's in the war against Amalek, whether it's when Moshe comes down from Har Sinai, whether it's last week's parsha, the story of Eldad Umeidad, he's always called Yehoshua. When Moshe in Parshat Pinchas appoints him as the next leader, he's Yehoshua. As I said, this parsha is the only place he's called by his, quote, original name of Hoshea. The Parshanim want to give two reasons, two explanations that I've seen for why Moshe changes his name. One is, of course, the well-known one that Rashi quotes, that his name is changed to Yehoshua as a tefillah. Moshe prays that Hashem should say Yah by putting Yud in front of his name. He gives the name of Yud and Hey, the two letters that form the name of Hashem, in front of his name, and that is there that Hashem should save you from any ill effects or any mistakes that might be made by these people as they're going about their mission. Hashem should protect you. And the question Parshanim will ask, well, if Moshe davened for Yehoshua, why didn't he daven for all of them that they should have a successful mission? And the answer seemingly given is because, well, Yehoshua is Moshe's protege. He's his mentee. He's his prime number one student. And if he doesn't, if things go wrong with him, then perhaps it will reflect poorly on Moshe. So therefore, Moshe specifically offers a tefillah on behalf of Yehoshua. That's one school of thought. There's another whole school of thought I've seen among a number of the Parshanim, that when it says Vayikra Moshe Hoshea bin Nun Yehoshua, it says that Moshe changed Hoshea bin Nun's name to Yehoshua. That means that Moshe had in the past already changed his name to Yehoshua. When did Moshe change his name to Yehoshua? We would like to ask, what do you mean? He had changed his name in the past. And the Parshanim suggest that it was the norm. When somebody was elevated to a new position, especially a position of second in command to somebody, they would get a name change. And the Parshanim bring as proof the fact that when Yosef is before Paro and Paro appoints him as second in command, he gives him a new name. He gives him a name, Tzafnat Paneach. And we see the same thing in Nebuchadnezzar. When Nebuchadnezzar elevates Daniel to a new position, he changes his name to Belshazzar. And when he appoints his three friends, who we call Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, changes their names to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it's not abnormal for somebody who is appointing somebody to a position of prominence to give them a new name. It's like they're just like Havdil, you get a movie star, they don't want to use, no, but that name won't look good in lights. You got to give them a new name that'll shine and sparkle and make them, prominent. So we give people a new name to indicate their new mission, their new job in life. So that's one of the other school of thought among the Parshanim, that Moshe had in the past already changed his name to Yehoshua, which is why throughout Sefer Shemot, Sefer Bamidbar, everywhere else, he's called Yehoshua bin Nun, because Moshe, as his second in command, or as his protege, his chief student, he is given that name Yehoshua. Okay. We move on. Moshe sends them to search out Canaan, but he gives them a whole order of instructions. Vayomer Aleihem, he tells them the following. First and foremost, he gives them some directions on how to go. He says, Alu Zeba Negev. When you start out, go up through the south. That's where we're camped now. Don't go taking any detours around, finding a different way to go in, because the assumption here is that we're camped right here at the southern border. When we enter Eretz Yisrael, we're going to go through the southern border. So let's start there and see what we're going to meet there. Then Valitim et Har. Then you should go up to the mountains. Don't immediately, when you come in through the south, go to the coastal plain. Go up through the mountains. That's the way you should go. Or item et haaretz, and you should see the land mahi, what type of land it is. Vet ama yoshev olah, and the people who are living there. Hachazak u'arafah, are they strong people? Are they weak people? Hama'atu imrav, is it heavily densely populated or sparsely populated? These are all things that we would think are important if this is a military reconnaissance mission, which is what we assume it is, because that's what the people came and asked. We got to go see what we're getting ourselves into. We're about to go conquer Eretz Yisrael. Let's find out what we're getting ourselves into. So these are the normal questions you'd ask. What's the terrain? What are the people like? How many people are there? What kind of land is it? Is it a good land? Is it not a good land? Now, this would be important. You're looking to conquer a land. You want to make sure it's going to be able to sustain your population. You need to know, is it good for crops? Is it good for raising cattle? Is it good for building cities on? Or is it all desert and quicksand and what have you? What type of cities are already there in existence that the people are currently dwelling in that we're going to have to conquer? Are they do they live in open cities, or are they living in fortified cities? By the way, the Medrash says that we would think, hey, if they're living in fortified cities, it means they're strong, and if they live in open cities, it means they're weak. The Medrash is exactly the opposite. If they live in open cities, they're not worried about anybody conquering them. They trust their own strength. Whereas if they live in walled cities, they're afraid of everybody passing by, so they got to live in strong, fortified cities to protect themselves. In either case, this is everything we've listed here is important information for the mission. We would understand why Moshe would put this on a list of questions. And then the final questions, what type of land is it for growing crops? Is it shmena? Does it produce nice, big, huge crops, or does it produce little, flimsy little fruits? Hayesh ba'etz imayin. Are there trees? What kind of trees are growing there? The heat chazaktem, and you should strengthen yourself. And you should if you can, take a sample of the fruit. Bring it back here for people to see what kind of fruit we're getting. And it tells us the pasuk then, and that's the end of his commandment. By the way, the Torah parenthetically tells us, "Vayamim yimei bi korei anavim." The time of season that they went was the time when the grapes were starting to reach their ripeness. It was the time of season when the grapes start reaching their ripeness. Now, notice the Torah just spent 20 psukim on describing this mission, and they haven't left yet. Okay, we're going to see a very, very sharp contrast to that when we get to Torah. But just remember that number 20 psukim the Torah spends on the preparation and the instructions for the mission. Now we get to the mission itself and how long the Torah spends on that. It says, "Vayalu vayatu et haaretz." They went up and they looked at the land, from the south all the way to the north. Vayalu vanegev. They they entered through the south. As we said, they were at the southern border, which makes sense. They had just come up from Egypt, which is to the south of Eretz Yisrael, and of course south and west. But they had marched northeast, so they were on the south, probably on the southeast border. Vayavo ad Chevron. Now, interestingly enough, we have a problem grammatically with these three words, Vayavo ad Chevron, because Vayalu, the beginning word of the pasuk, is they, referring to all of these 12 men who went up. They went up through the Negev. But Vayavo, he is in the singular. He came to Chevron. Problem. The Parshanim very simply say that the mission didn't go through Chevron. One of the spies took a detour from the rest of the group to visit Chevron. Now, if we think of Chevron, we know that Chevron happens to be the city Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov lived, city where they're buried, and of course, Marat HaMachpelah. And the Gemara Sota wants to tell us that Vayavo ad Chevron refers to one of the 12 spies, Kalev, from the tribe of Yehuda, who visited Chevron, and he went specifically to Marat HaMachpelah to daven to Hashem that he should save him, that if there was any problems, that he should protect him during this mission. By the way, in Chevron, the pasuk incidentally tells us that, by the way, in some things about Chevron, because it's mentioned Chevron, it tells us, by the way, there were 3 people who lived there. Their names were Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. They were the Yelidei HaAnak. They were the sons of Anak, the giant. And by the way, there are many who say that these 4 people, their father and the 3 of them, is why the city was also known as Kiryat Arba, the city of Arba. Others say that by their father's name, the Anak was not Anak, he was Arba, was his name. That's why the city was named Kiryat Arba, the city of Arba. But all sorts of interesting reasons why for that. But again, and the pasuk again tells us a very sort of, we mentioned Hebron. By the way, Hebron was built Sheva Shivnim Natalif Tzon Mitzrayim. Hebron was built 7 years before Tzon in Mitzrayim was built. Who cares? Why does the Torah tell us that? What difference does it make to this mission? Good questions. We're not going to get into them right now. Perhaps later we'll get to them. Vayavo ad Nachal Eshkol. So they came to this place called Nachal Eshkol. Now, Vayichvesu Misham, and they cut from there Zemorah, one branch, Eshkol Anavim Echad, one bundle of grapes, one cluster of grapes. Vayisa'u b'amot bishnayim, and to carry this cluster of grapes, they required a pole and 2 people. By the way, the Gemara says that can't be, because a pole obviously needs 2 people to carry it. Why would the Torah tell us it needed 2 people? It wasn't a pole and 2 people. It was an arrangement of poles carried by 8 people. That's how big the cluster of grapes was. They needed a square of 4 poles to support the weight of one cluster of grapes, just to give you an idea of how big the grapes were and how large this cluster of grapes was. Umina rimonim, and they also took from the rimonim, they took 1 pomegranate, umina teinim, and they took 1 fig. Medrash says that there were 8. Remember, there were 12 spies. Now, for whatever reason, Kalev, because he's from the tribe of Judah, he's the king. He doesn't have to carry anything. And Yehoshua, because he's Moshe's protege, doesn't have to carry anything. So they get a leave. But there are 10 spies. 8 of them are carrying the cluster of grapes. One of them is carrying a giant pomegranate. The other is carrying a pretty large-sized fig. It's not like a little, fig that he put in his pocket or a little pomegranate that he carried. They were big. Imagine if they needed 8 to carry a cluster of grapes. Imagine how big the Rimonim and the Teinim were. Okay. Now the par again, parenthetically, it has nothing to do with the mission. It says Lamakom Ahud, this place where they reached this Nachal, Kara Nachal Eshkol, they called it Nachal Eshkol, Alodot Eshkol Asher Kartumi Sham B'nei Yisrael, because of the cluster of grapes that they cut. Now the question is, Lamakom Kara Nachal Eshkol was called Nachal Eshkol. Who called it Nachal Eshkol? Was it they called it Nachal Eshkol because they cut it there? Okay, or had it been called Nachal Eshkol before that, but now it gets a double meaning. And if it was Nachal Eshkol before that, how did it get to be Nachal Eshkol? Now, one midrash I saw wants to say that it was called Nachal Eshkol after none other than Aner Eshkol Mamre, one of Avram's 3 supporters in his war against the 5 kings, was named Eshkol. According to one opinion, this Nachal happened to run through his property, therefore it was called Nachal Eshkol. The fact that it also happened to have a cluster of grapes cut from it was another reason why it's called Nachal Eshkol. Again, interestingly enough, the Torah here has spent 4 psukim describing the entire time they're in Eretz Yisrael, 2 of which at least are totally incidental. The whole thing that the Shech Hebron was built 7 years before Tzon and Mitzrayim, the whole point that why they called it Nachal Eshkol had nothing to do with this mission. So the Torah basically spends half of 2 psukim and 1 whole pasuk on telling us about the whole mission. So we see that even though it took 20 psukim to describe the lead up to it, 4 psukim, the whole thing, now we get to the report. The report is Vayashuvu mitor aretz. They came back miketz 40 yom at the end of 40 days. Vayelchu, and they came. Vayelvahu, and who did they report to? Who sent them on the mission? Moshe. Who should they report to? Moshe. Who do they report to? Vayelvahu Moshe ve'el Aaron ve'el kol hadat b'nei Yisrael. They return to Moshe and Aaron, and they gather everybody together. El midbar paran kadesha, to where they were camped. That's where they set out from. That the Torah has already told us they were in midbar paran at the city of Kadesh. We knew that. When they gave their report to Moshe, they made sure the entire congregation was present. And as part of the report, they showed him this huge fruit that they brought back. They reported they're reporting to Moshe, but it's again in front of everybody. And this is what they reported. We went to the land you sent us to. It's definitely flowing with milk and honey, like you said. Look at the fruit. You can see from the fruit, it's obviously a very fruitful place. Then they add another sentence, though. Ephes, however, the people who live there are strong. The cities are fortified and large. We saw the sons of giants there. Amalek Yoshev Beretz HaNegev. Amalek lives on the southern area. Vachiti, Vayivusi, Amori Yoshev Bahar. The Hittites, the Yevusites, the Amorites live on the mountains. Vaknani Yoshev Al Hayam. The Canaanites live on the ocean, on the plain side, on the ocean. Val Yad HaYarden, and also on the plains near the Jordan River. So the Canaanites live on both sides of the mountains. The mountains are inhabited by the Chitim, Yevusim, and Amorim, and Amalek has the southern border. Now, if I were to ask you up to this point, is this a good report, bad report, favorable, unfavorable? Good question. I don't know. I mean, how would you feel if you heard that? Wait, it's nice and fruitful, strong people living there. Moshe, that's what you asked us to say, right? We haven't that. Is there anything you see up to this point that they've done wrong? The answer is the Parshanim struggle with this. What is wrong with the report they brought up till this point? We're going to see a little bit more when what happens later. But at this point, it seems as though they're bringing a relatively objective report. Here's what we found. Here's the fruits we found. Here's the people we found. The cities. That's what you asked us to look at. Now suddenly it says a very strange thing. Vayas Kalev et ha'am el Moshe. Kalev silenced the people to Moshe. What does that mean that he silenced the people? Obviously, there's some reason he had to silence everybody because everybody was doing something, but there was a lot of noise, obviously. Now the question is, was this noise favorable noise or negative noise? And the implication we get, in fact, they had to silence them to Moshe, towards Moshe, sounds like, to me, from the implication of the verse, and to most of the Parshanim and to the Gemara also, is that people, guess what the people did they've been doing for the last year, since they left Egypt. Every time there's any kind of snag in the road, what do? They start complaining and fetching. So what are they doing here? Presumably they started complaining, and who do they complain to? To Moshe. Why'd you bring us out of Egypt? Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Why we were better off being slaves in Egypt? Why'd you start up with power in the first place? So Kalev has to silence people who are complaining about Moshe, and he says the following. Alone nalev yorashnota. We can certainly go up and inherit it. There's no question we can do this, which seems to imply that at least his understanding from what the spy says, well, they were saying, oh, they're so strong, they're too strong for us to conquer. That's what Kalev read into it, and obviously that's what the people, that's why they started fetching to Moshe, obviously read into it. Now they go a step further. The people who went up, the others said, we cannot go up to the rest of these people. They are too strong for us. So it's very clear that now, after this verse, we clearly understand that there's a difference of opinion. The majority opinion says it's no good. We're never going to be able to conquer it. The minority opinion says no problem. We'll blow them away. No problem here. Now the Torah this is the end of the report basically, but the Torah now goes a little bit further and tells us the implication of the report. They brought forth the report, the negative report. Diba always refers to a negative report. We have that word when Yosef is bringing Diba. Yosef Dibatam Ra'a El Avihem. Yosef brought all the things he saw in his brothers that he did that weren't 100% kosher. He told his father about. So here, Dibat Haaretz Asher Torah, they spoke evil of the land that they had been sent to look at. El Bnei Yisrael, to all of Bnei Yisrael, saying, Haaretz Asher Avarnu Vala Turata, this land that you sent us to, and we passed through it. Eretz Ochelet Yoshveha Hi. It is a land that consumes its inhabitants. Pretty strong language there. The Chala'am Asher Ra'inu B'tocha, and all of the people that we saw in its midst were Anshe Midot, men of stature. So we're getting a report here that, again, are these the words they said? These aren't the words they said at the beginning, but it seems that now they are amplifying those words. Now that Kalev has given the contrarian opinion, they are amplifying their negative report. There we saw the Nephilim, B'nei Anak, the sons of the giants, Nephilim. Now they add this following, we were in their eyes like grasshoppers. We felt like grasshoppers, and that's how they looked at us, as though we were little bugs. How did they know what the people felt about them? Great question. I see from your look that you're asking this question. How did the spies know how the inhabitants of the land perceived them? Midrash gives us an answer. Of course, the Midrash has to step in and give an answer because the Midrash is puzzled by the same question. What is it? What is that? The Midrash tells us that the spies reported that when they were hiding from these giants, they overheard them talking about each other, that they saw people who looked like grasshoppers. They saw people the size of grasshoppers in their backyard. In the wheat there, we saw some grasshopper-sized people. That's what it says. Okay, that's the end of the report. So the report takes, again, a total of 8 psukim, 9 psukim. So again, we have, as I said, 20 psukim, 5 psukim, and 8 psukim. So it's not even distribution between the preparation for the mission itself, and the report of the mission. Now, the next whole chapter is Hashem's response to the mission, which is not very favorable, and of course ends up with the decree that the Jews are going to, that the Bnei Yisrael are going to spend the next 40 years in the Midbar. Now, I want to go to the same story, the similar story that we use as the Haftarah, story of Yericho, and Yehoshua's mission to Yericho. Now, this is 40 years later. Jews are not yet entered Eretz Yisrael. They're again about to enter Eretz Yisrael. However, this time they're not on the southern border. They are now entering Eretz Yisrael on its eastern border from the Jordan River. They're camped on the east bank of the Jordan. They're about to cross the Jordan River opposite Yericho. And Yehoshua says before they're going to go, he decides he's going to do something. He's going to take care of something, some business here. Again, the word Vayishlach, as we had prominently at the beginning of the parsha, Vayishlach appears here also. Vayishlach Yehoshua bin Nun min Hashitim. Shnayim anashim meraglim cheresh lemor. He sends 2 people. First, he doesn't send 12. He doesn't pick one from each tribe. He sends 2 people. They are clearly called miraglim. Their job is to be spies, to look at what's going on. Cheresh, he sends them secretly. Nobody knows about the mission. Well, obviously, if they're spies, you don't want people to know about everybody know about their mission, right? Okay, but he specifically Cheresh, he doesn't tell anybody. The only 3 people who know about this mission: the 2 spies and Yehoshua. People don't have any clue what's going on. This is all done behind closed doors. Nobody sees them leave. They sneak out stealthily, and nobody hopefully sees them sneak into Yericho. That's the whole point. He tells them, he gives them the mission in 6 short words: Lechu, Re'u et haaretz et Yericho. Go look at the land and Yericho, because that's going to be the first place we got to stop off, it seems. The Navi does not even spend an entire pasuk on the preparation for the mission. Remember, our Torah took 20 psukim to tell us how long it was going to prepare. Navi takes less than a full pasuk. In the same pasuk that he gives them the mission, Vayechu, they're gone already. Vayavo, they've already arrived at Yericho. They come to the house of a Zona. A Zona, 2 different translations. One is a lady of the night. The other is that Isha Zona is an innkeeper, which generally might have been a place people went to find ladies of the night. They weren't walking the streets, I guess, back then. There were no lights for them to walk the streets. So they hung out at the inn. What else? Where else are they going to find, a nice person to spend the evening with if they're travelers from out of town, right? Ushma Rachav, her name was Rachav, this person who ran this establishment, Vayishkvu Shama, and they decided to sleep there. Now, their cover somehow, obviously, they did a great job of getting away from the camp of Bnei Yisrael without being noticed, but they didn't do such a great job of getting into Yericho without being noticed. Why? Because in verse 2, we're immediately told, somehow the king of Yericho finds out, last night some people came, Bnei Yisrael, from those Jews, you remember them, to dig into the land. From the word to dig in, to find out. Notice here, they're not calling L'Ragel. It doesn't say the spy. Lachpor, to dig up, to find out what's going on here. And then we have this whole story now. The king of Yericho sends to the innkeeper. He says, hey, we want to arrest these 2 guys. We found out why they've come. Let's hand them over. She doesn't hand them over. She takes the 2 men. Now, interestingly, she hides him. Okay? Shnei Anashim, the verb should have said Batitzpeneim. She hides them. Batitzpeno, she hid him. Two schools of thought among the Parshanim. The Midrashic interpretation is that she only had to hide one of the two spies. Why? Because one of the spies was a gifted individual who knew Kabbalistically how to make himself invisible. That's the Midrash. Midrash says that one of the spies was Pinchas, who happens to be none other, according to Midrash, than Eliyahu Hanavi, who has this wonderful ability to make himself appear invisible as needed. Okay, so that's the Midrashic opinion. The other Parshanim who take this, Vatispino, means she hid each one separately, so that if one of them got their hiding place was revealed, the other one at least would have a chance to get back and deliver the report. I think that's a pretty prudent thought, because once we find out why she's chosen to hidden the people, and we find out what she's going to propose, it would make sense that she'd want to make sure that at least one of the spies gets back. But she said, "Cain boy Noshim lo yadat minhem." But she makes up the story. I know those two guys come up. They ain't here anymore. They left already. When they closed the gate, in the middle of the night, they didn't stay. Yeah, they came, they grabbed the bite to eat and left. That's it. Lo yadati anashim. She really, plays it up well here for the king's officers. I have no clue where they went. But if you hurry up and chase after them, you can probably overtake them because they were on foot. You guys will chase them with, animals. You'll find them. Go do your job. She sends them off on the red herring. Nice false scent. What did she really do? The puzzle continues. She really brought them up to the roof. Now here it says she hid them. She had hidden them among the flax that was drying on the roof. That's what they used roofs for back then. They had flat roofs. They used them to dry flax, or they used them to dry fruits out. That's what they used the roofs for. Of course, the king sent his men immediately after them to chase after them. They chased after them till the crossing of the Jordan. And they closed the gates. They locked the city. People couldn't go out because they didn't. If they were still, they hadn't gotten out yet. Let's lock them in the city. After the king's messengers left to chase after them to find them, they locked the city gates, didn't let anybody else out. And now, before they came to go to sleep for the night, she went up to the roof to have a little discussion with them, having saved their lives, of course. But she says the following: very, very interesting. Okay, she tells the spies, I know that Hashem has given you the land. And your dread, the fear of all of the Jewish people, and by the way, not just the Jewish people, but their God, has fallen upon us. And all of the people of the land, their courage has melted from before you. Why? Maurice, that's a great question. Why? How did she know that? How did she know all this? Because she's going to tell you how she knows. Give us a minute. How do we know all this? Ki shamanu. Hey, news travels in this neck of the woods. We've heard how Hashem moved the waters of the Sea of Reeds from in front of you when you left Egypt. By the way, she doesn't mention they heard about the 10 plagues. Doesn't say that. She heard about the splitting of the sea. And what you've done to the two Amorite kings who lived on the east bank of the Jordan, where you are right now, where you're camped right now. These two powerful kings, who you totally, completely annihilated. So again, news traveled. They knew that they have just defeated the two most powerful kings in the region. Well, three most, if you want to include Egypt in it. They've conquered the three most powerful kings in the region. Obviously, they're the king of Jericho and these little city-states, of little pitchik city-states who have small, are not going to be a match for them if they couldn't stand, if Sichon and Og and Paro, the king of Egypt, weren't able to stand up to them. How are we little puny little things going to stand up to these Jewish people? So that's how she knew it, by Nishmas. And now she goes why she knew that everybody else has lost all courage and hope of fighting against the Jews. Nishma, when we've heard Vayimas Levavenu, all our hearts melted. Nobody has even thought of having the strength to raise up against you. Why? Not because you guys are strong. Don't think it's because you guys. We know. See, now it's interesting. In our parsha, the Jews themselves didn't get it, that God is stronger than everybody in Canaan. They said, oh no, we're never going to be able to beat them. Here, the Canaanites themselves are saying exact opposite of what's in our parsha. Why? We know we know your God. He's the one, the most powerful one. He's the God of the heavens and the earth, and he's it. So why is she telling them all of this? Obviously, she's going to make a proposal. Here's her proposal. I want you to make me a promise. Why? Because I've done you a very big favor. Like I saved your lives, kind of kept you out of prison. And you should do kindness with my father's house and give me a true sign. I want you to allow to live my mother, my father, my brothers, sisters, and of course their extended families. I want you to save us all from death, because we know. What are you going to do when you come and conquer the city? You're going to kill all the inhabitants, just like you did to Sivan and Og. How did they know that? They were obviously were extrapolating from the last few wars that the Jews have fought, where we destroy everybody who is an idolater. And so she says, I want you to save us all. So she made an offer. They've got to respond. We agree with your proposal, as long as you don't tell anybody about it. Don't tell anybody that we're going to save your lives. We will. Basically they say our lives are we should be killed if we don't do what you said, as long as you don't reveal what you've told anybody. When Hashem gives us the land, again, notice this very simple, interesting phrase, not when we conquer the land, when Hashem gives us the land. And we'll treat you honestly and fairly. Okay, so basically they strike a deal with her. Now again, remember, the city gates are locked. They're still inside the city. How do they get out? She happens to lower them from her window by, I guess, some type of rope. Because her house happened to be the wall. Her outer wall was part of the city wall. That's the way many city walls were constructed. The front of each house was the city wall, and they were all flush with one another. She was built on the city, and then now that they've struck the deal, she gives them advice as to how to avoid the people who are searching for them. Go up, hide in the mountains, because the chasers who went to chase after you on the way, after having not found you, on the way back, you don't want to run into them as they're heading back to give their report to the king of Yericho. So if you'll hide there in the mountains for 3 days, find a nice cave to hide in the mountains for 3 days, hang out there, until the pursuers will return. And after that, they're not going to send out another search party to search you after the first one didn't find you. Then you'll be safe. You'll go home. No problem. But then they tell her the following. They tell her, okay, we made a deal with you, but the deal is off unless you meet the following condition. We're coming when we enter the land. There is this scarlet thread. You have to tie this red string. I assume it was a little bit bigger than a piece of thread. It was something they had to be able to see. In other words, this is some symbol to the attackers that this is the house you got to spare. Okay, we want you to put it into the window where you're letting us out through. Whoever you want to save, it's got to be in your house. We're not going to go searching the city, find out who's related to you. You got to bring them all into your house if you want them to be saved. Anybody who leaves the house, sorry, they're responsible for their own death. We are innocent because you want them to be saved. They got to stay in the house. But everybody who's in the house, we will be responsible if anybody that harms them. However, if you reveal this to anybody, the whole deal is off if you tell anybody about it. Again, she obviously says, you got a deal. She sends them and they go. And she immediately ties this ribbon or whatever this is, whatever this thread or ribbon, whatever it was, into the window, so she makes sure she's not going to forget it. It's not going to disappear. And presumably, and as we read, by the way, later on in chapter 7 of Yehoshua, when they do conquer the city, this house is spared. The wall falls. This house does not fall down, and everybody in it is saved as they promised her. And by the way, the Medrash continues that she, of course, converts. She and the whole family, I guess, convert to Judaism, and they all live happily ever after. We're still going to finish the story of the spies. Now we finished with what happened while they're in Yericho, but they still haven't gotten back to the camp. They leave her and they go up to the mountains as she suggested. They wait for 3 days until the pursuers come back. Obviously, the pursuers searched the whole way and didn't find anything. Very simply, why? Because they weren't there to be found. So they returned and came down from the mountain after 3 days. And they come to Yehoshua bin Nun. Notice the Navi spends 20 psukim, over 20 psukim on the story of what happens to them when they've left the camp and they're in Yericho. And now they're going to give a report. Remember, the report of the spies took 8 psukim. Here's their report. They told him everything that had happened to them. That's their report. That's it. That's it. That's the report. However, they followed up by the following. That's the end of the report. But they do have one addendum that they report. Also, by the way, interestingly, Yehoshua bin Nun. They come to Yehoshua. They don't come to Yehoshua in front of the whole people. They were spies. They were given a specific mission. They return and report to the person who sent them only. And the person who reports can use the information whatever they want, which is what a spy is supposed to. They're not supposed to go to the press and announce it to the whole world what they've just found on their spy mission. By Yomer el Yehoshua, but they follow and they tell Yehoshua, Ki natan Hashem biyadenu et kol haaretz. Clearly, Hashem has given us the land. All of the inhabitants of the land have lost confidence. Their hearts are melted deep in front of us. Now, the interesting thing here, again, they only report is one pasuk. But what is the prominent part of the pasuk? Not that we're going to conquer the land, but Ki natan Hashem biyadenu et haaretz. Hashem has given us the land. Again, the same thing they said to her. When Hashem gives us the land, she said it to them, when Hashem gives you the land. It's interesting what's missing from their report. Let's go back up to their report in the parsha. What's the key point that's missing? Okay, they come back. What do they say? We went to the land that you sent us. The land, the people are strong. They give their full report. What is missing? There's no mention of Hashem's name. There's no mention of Hashem's name. What did the spies do? They took Hashem out of the equation. Once we take Hashem out of the equation, yeah, they're too strong for us. You know, the Arabs in 1948 had how many people in their armies? How many Jews were living in Eretz Yisrael at the time? What was the ratio? 80 million to 500,000. Okay, clearly, there is no way that you could have won that war, except for one way, that you put Hashem into the equation. When we put Hashem into the equation, nothing is impossible. When Hashem is out of the equation, everything seems impossible. And we see a very, very sharp contrast between the spies and Moshe's story, the spies and the Yehoshua story, and it's all very, very clear when we take that one word and put it back and take it out of the story and look at where it is and where it isn't. And so therefore, if we go back now to the whole story of Parshat Shlach, we can wrap it up in a very simple message to us. Very, very important in every generation, no matter where we are, no matter where we're living. If we take Hashem out of the equation, everything seems impossible. If we put Hashem back into the equation, anything is possible for the Jewish people when we are with Hashem, when Hashem is with us, because we are following in the path that Hashem wants us to follow. And I think that's the clear reason that this parsha is chosen, this parak is chosen as Haftorah. It's not just the spies and the spies. It's the sharp contrast between the faith of the spies in the one hand and the lack of faith of the spies and the people on the other. And that's really the whole lesson the Haftorah wants us to teach us and focus us in as we're reading the parsha, that when we take Hashem out of the equation, nothing is possible. Everything seems impossible. So I hope we understand and take that message to heart, and that Hashem should bless us, that we should all be good spies for Am Yisrael, that when we are going and telling everybody, because we're the spies for our friends back home, people we know in whatever country we came from, who we still keep in touch with. Some of them have probably given up hope with us because we see things with rose-colored glasses and they gave up on us. We don't want to hear about all the things, great things that are happening in Eretz Yisrael. But those that do, those that still keep in touch with us or that visit here, we have to always share the positive aspects of Eretz Yisrael and the fact that when Hashem is with us, we can accomplish everything. Those two lessons, the beauty of Eretz Yisrael, all of the positive things about Eretz Yisrael, we should be sharing, because we indeed are the spies that are hopefully going to help all of Am Yisrael ultimately get the message that the place for us to be is in Eretz Yisrael, and the things for us to be doing is connecting to Hashem through Eretz Yisrael, through the Torah, and then we'll be zocheh to Gula Shleim Meher Yameinu. Thank you all. Questions, comments, and feedback at this point. Gershon has a question. Go ahead. The Gershon asked the connection between miraglim, regel, and shalosh regalim. And the answer is yes, they're all connected. They all come from the word regel, foot. A miragel is somebody who walks around and collects information. Regel, he walks on his feet and collects information. He doesn't fly over everybody, unless he happens to work from a spy plane today, but he is generally a miragel, somebody who walks about collecting information. A regel, why is a regel? Regel is your foot, okay? So he walks in front. And why are the shalosh regalim called the shalosh regalim? Because they are the three pilgrimage festivals. They are the three festivals we are supposed to ascend on foot to the Temple Mount, to wherever the Beit HaMikdash is. So clearly the words are all related through, of course, the foot. Okay, so that's the answer to that question. Any other questions, comments? Thank you all for joining. I hope everybody has a good rest of the week. Shabbat Shalom, and Bezrat Hashem, we will see you all next week. Same time, same channel. The only caveat I have is for the next possibly 5 to 6 weeks, we may be starting perhaps a couple minutes late, because we have to wait till Myra finishes. So and the days we're at the longest days and shortest nights of the year for the next like 4 or 5 weeks. So perhaps we'll be starting a little late. Thank you all and have a good evening. Laila Tov.